Dear distinguished elected and statutory delegates, my name is Mohammed Hayyatudeen.
Another election cycle is here, and Nigerians are bracing up to 2023, when the general elections will be conducted to elect a new set of leaders to run the affairs of the country for another 4 years at all levels. In the next 25 minutes, Mohammed Hayyatudeen, a presidential aspirant seeking to become the flag bearer of the People's Democratic Party, PDP, will be responding to some of the issues likely to agitate the minds of delegates of the party when they assemble to decide who becomes the presidential candidate of the party in the upcoming general elections. Scores of participants are in the contest for nomination, and Mohammed Hayyatudeen is not unmindful of this fact. He has therefore been crisscrossing the country, making consultations with party stalwarts and strategic stakeholders in an effort to provide greater insight into his person and vision for the country. His responses in this interview session contains these and more. But first, he introduces himself to the delegates.
Mohammed Hayyatudeen is someone who was actually born and bred in Nigeria, worked and lived in this country all my life. I come from Maiduguri in Borno State. My dad was a veteran educationist who had 4 wives, and I'm one of 26 children. I went to school in all kinds of places. So even though I was born in Maiduguri, I actually moved at a very tender age to Zaria when my father was posted there to complete my primary education. I then went on to Kefi Government College in the then Benue Plateau State before ending up for my advanced studies in my degree program in economics at the Ahmadu Bello University in Zaria. I've only worked, surprisingly, only 2 places in my life. The New Nigeria Development Company, NNDC, where I rose to become the group chief executive, and also FSB International Bank, where I spent 15 years. I left in September of 2004 at a relatively young age to then set up my own group of companies, which are mainly focused on investments. So that's who Mohammed Hayyatudeen is. I'm married to a very beautiful lady, and we have 5 children.
Beyond being spurred by patriotic considerations to join the race for the presidency, Mohammed Hayyatudeen gives the delegates other reasons for his decision.
The reason why I decided to go into partisan politics, one, because I think I'm well prepared, having accomplished so much in the public and private and civil society space, to now venture into politics. Second reason is that it is important for us to actually enrich the pool of politicians in the country. So you require people of diversified talent and background to get into politics, so that Nigerians can then expect that based on that diversity and the pool of talent and experience, they can expect much better governance than has hitherto been the case.
Being a presidential aspirant is quite different from being a presidential candidate. Hayyatudeen shares his thoughts with delegates on what makes him think he will secure his party's ticket at the primaries to become its flag bearer at the election proper.
Running a race for the presidency is a huge and gigantic undertaking. It's a very, very serious business that requires careful and painstaking reflection. I reflected very, very deeply before I went in. And I went in the knowledge and belief, one, that I can do the job, two, that I'll be able to mobilize the resources and the support required to be able to prosecute a very brilliant campaign. It's an open space. Anybody is actually free to join. That's what democracy is all about. So I go in there with the full intention of winning the primaries and winning the general election.
While acknowledging that he may not be what is known in Nigerian parlance as traditional politician, he tells the delegates he is still a force to be reckoned with.
I'm not traditional in the sense that I've spent almost all of my life and my career doing other things in the private space, even though from time to time I also go into the public space. But my major credentials are that of an accomplished technocrat, an economist, and a banker who also believes in strategic planning and visioning. But even though this is what I have done, essentially, I have not been aloof and remained in my own cage, so to speak. I've always straddled the divide between the public and the private sector, but I've never stood for any elective office. There are examples around the world of people who actually all their lives have more or less been in the private space, running private sector institutions or running NGOs, that suddenly burst onto the scene and embrace partisan politics. Recent examples, if you like, are people like Macron in France.
Mohammed Hayyatudeen is not oblivious of the fact that the race is going to be tough, going by the number of aspirants that have put themselves forward for the contest.
Nigeria is facing extraordinary crisis of immense proportions at this point in time. And what Nigeria needs is a leader who is firmly grounded in certain aspects of leadership. One, a deep-seated knowledge of Nigeria's economy. Because at the root of everything that is going on, in terms of the violence and the crime that we are seeing, the deprivation, our social institutions decaying, is a major economic issue. As someone who is a trained economist and a financial engineer, somebody who has been a transformation manager most of my life, I have a deep-seated understanding of what is afflicting our society and our economy. And I think at this moment in time, you require somebody who has the depth and breadth of that knowledge and the vision and the courage to fix problems. So that's number one. Number two, my background speaks to what Nigeria needs at this point in time. Because I believe I'm a visionary. I have those sort of unique capabilities, not just to be operationally intensive in terms of doing day-to-day things, but I'm always able to lift my own sight and see far into the future and design a future for this country that will take us to the dreamland. And finally, my record is clean and untainted.
Getting down to the critical issue of governance, he shares with delegates his agenda for the country.
My approach is to divide that into three components by addressing short-term problems, medium-term problems, and long-term problems. And for each one of these, identify a prescriptive range of solutions that must be applied as quickly as possible. So Nigeria is bleeding very badly now. Like a patient on the operating table, you need to stop the bleeding. Those are the short-term actions that must be taken. The medium-term actions that need to be taken are to then begin rebuilding the country by eradicating poverty as much as possible, by reducing unemployment to the barest minimum, by getting our children back to school, by solving the problems of the youth and dealing with many of our gender issues, by pushing back, rolling back the frontiers of terrorism so that you are able to deal with this problem. In the long term, what you want to do is to carry out a major transformation program of this country and make it one of the leading countries in the emerging markets that is highly industrialized, that has all of the linkages along the agricultural value chain, where you're also in a position to actually formulate policies pertaining to integrated rural development that used to happen during the First Republic. That you are going to make this economy export driven, that you look after the welfare of people who are weak and the downtrodden in our society.
Social re-engineering is what he thinks Nigeria needs and tells the delegates how he intends to go about it.
There is no society or no country that can actually hope to make progress without ensuring that its ethos, its norms, its values are second to none. Today, the country is in social decay, and you cannot reasonably expect this country to be developed if the president of the country, whoever takes power, and I expect to be the one in 2023, that you do not actually begin by rebuilding the social fabric of the society to make this country one that observes rules, that is decent, there is respect for elders, that we are God-fearing, not in terms of just going through the rituals of praying, but truly and sincerely in the heart of our hearts and in our soul, that we fear God, that we follow the teachings of the scriptures, whether this is the Bible or the Quran, that we practice the habit of good neighborliness, that we are able to eliminate fraud and drugs and other vices from the fabric of our society.
Mohammed Hayyatudeen used the opportunity to also tell delegates about his agenda for economic recovery, believing that it is key to the success of any new government in the country.
Mohammed Hayyatudeen as president, as an individual, will be the chief moral agent of the country. He'll be the chief motivator. He'll be the person who will be leading the way like a shepherd in order to mobilize the Nigerian people towards a given end. That's number one. Number two, a tree can never make a forest. My intention, therefore, as president, is to ensure that I dedicate a large percentage of my time towards recruiting the best talent that I can find from all nooks and crannies of this country, regardless of their gender, their background, ethnicity, religion. Every single Nigerian is a citizen of this country who has equal rights like any other Nigerian. I'm going to get people from the diaspora in order to bring them to serve. So surrounding the office of the president and in and out of it, you must get highly competent and experienced people who know their dues and who are actually honest. The single most important thing, in my view, is that there is no one who can actually make a success of this job in the Nigeria of today without carrying out major reforms in the delivery of public service. I think that's where the problem is. There is a need for implementing major reforms in the public service in order to make it more dynamic, right-size it, make it more competent, train them, motivate them, reward them for good performance, sanction them swiftly for poor performance. nobody's an island to himself, and I would need a brand new public service that has a completely new kind of orientation. These people are actually very, very competent. Go to any ministry, you'll find very competent people. But I think you need to change the culture around and motivate them tremendously and see them as partners in progress.
He also speaks on the foreign policy objectives of his government if elected, describing it as one that will underscore the importance and strategic relevance of Nigeria in the Committee of Nations.
When you are actually formulating and prosecuting international diplomatic policy, certain things are imperative. One is actually the recognition, the clear recognition that you cannot sell from an empty wagon unless you are strong internally. You cannot go out there and beat your chest. The world respects countries that are strong economically, socially, and militarily. So Nigeria has to be very strong. So we need to rebuild our internal strength in all spheres of life. People will then listen to you.
Insecurity is top on his agenda, and he believes it will be agitating the minds of delegates, prompting him on how he intends to go about solving this very worrisome problem.
Since 9/11, September the 11th, I believe 2001, the character and shape of security around the world has changed in a very profound way. And many countries now have a more wholesome view of security. So there is economic security, energy security, climate security, political security, diplomatic security. All of these are interlinked. And also security from a military standpoint in terms of dealing with violence and internal strife and defending the territorial integrity of the country. If you look at Nigeria very, very carefully with regards to insecurity pertaining to bandits, kidnapping, Boko Haram, etc., it's a direct result of insecurity in all these other areas. So you cannot fix one and leave them because you're dealing with an entire ecosystem. So you need a much broader definition, a much broader view of security in order to secure your own people. I believe that the size of the armed forces is very small for a population of 210 million. Number three, given the rapid advances in information and technology, there are all kinds of sophisticated intelligence assets that need to be deployed. We need to rearm and re-equip our armed forces. But more than that, I think national security is the business of everybody. We tend to think that that's just the business of government and they just go with guns and bullets to deal with them. The press, traditional rulers, the academia, retired military and police officers, diplomats, all shades of society, including our clergy and our religious leaders, all need to be involved in this, and our community leaders. These people live in communities, and so there is a need for the government to actually deal with this issue holistically by bringing everybody inside the tent to deal with it. As president, on May 29th, 2023, the very first thing that I would do is to declare a national security emergency in this country.
Accountability in governance and the utilization of public funds are key to the success and progress of any nation. Muhammad Hayyatudeen tells the delegates that he has a clear idea of what he intends to do.
We are going to have very strong monitoring and evaluation systems to ensure that people who are assigned responsibilities are able to serve the Nigerian people effectively, because ultimately our bosses are the 210 million Nigerians. And those of us who actually raise our hands and swear on the Bible or the Quran had better ensure that 24/7 our task is to serve the best interests of the Nigerian people to whom we are accountable. And therefore people who are working for us must in turn be held accountable. Otherwise we cannot deliver the dividends of democracy to Nigerian people.
How about funding government programs and initiatives? He shares his thoughts with delegates.
First and foremost, you need to come up with a vision document. Where do I want to take Nigeria? And over what period of time? As far as I'm concerned, I would like the end state that I would like to see is a Nigeria that is one of the 7th largest economies in the world. By what time? By the year 2050, which is about 30 years from now. How do we achieve it? By coming up with 3 national development planning cycles, each one of about 10 years. In the first phase, what we'd like to do is to deal with everyday problems of today that deal with hunger, ignorance, disease, solve problems of education, problems of poverty, problems of crime, problems of terrorism, and take Nigerians out of poverty and get them to have a very decent standard of living. In the second phase is to make Nigeria a highly industrialized country. And the third phase is to make it globally competitive, highly export-driven, and Nigeria is then able to get into the service sector whereby a larger chunk of the GDP will be based on the service sector.
He tells delegates about his style of leadership, which he said is people-oriented and seeks to inspire them to aspire to greater heights.
I want to be a very good role model. That's number one. Leadership by example. I want to be someone who will be remembered as a very efficient manager of resources, as someone who does not think about himself, his family, or his friends, but somebody who is simple and humble, that is there to actually serve the best interests of the Nigerian people. That will be my style of management.
Finally, he has this closing remarks for delegates and Nigerians.
I would like to say that Nigerians should ask themselves a very critical question. 2023 is a very defining moment in the history of this country. This country, to the best of my recollection since childhood, has never faced this kind of monumental crisis. Nigeria is on the brink. And therefore, I would like to ask Nigerians to hold leaders accountable. And the only way they can hold them accountable is to participate effectively and robustly in politics. I would like them to go and register as quickly as possible, come out in large numbers so that they can exercise their franchise and ensure that they get a government that they deserve. A government that will not further dissolve this country, but actually rebuild it and make it a very strong and prosperous country.